Good evening and welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Winter from FractalView.com, and we're very excited tonight. With us, we have Kate Forbes from South Africa talking about the microbiome of the guts and the plasma intelligence of the guts, and using Theraphi and plasma to help heal. And her work using the Theraphi and microbiome gut intelligence to help traumatize young people. And toward the end, more even about her work using the plasma field of Theraphi to create a kind of communications portal, as it were, that enables communication with some pretty advanced intelligences. And the fundamental concept here this evening is that plasma can be intelligent, a charge field, as it were, and that this kind of intelligence can be used to create healing dramatically. And what's wonderful is Kate is brought a lifetime of practical experience working with nourishing the gut, etc. And so I'm just going to do the usual couple-minute intro here and turn it over to Kate. And for my couple-minute intro here, setting a background, I was going to tell one little story in terms of the context of how it was that a microbiome, which is to say a field effect created of the sort of charged radiance by a collective microbial activity that becomes synergetic. And that story is the following. We have a somewhat beautiful friend here of years named Malcolm Borgward in Perth, Western Australia. And Malcolm, like others of our friends who are advanced biodynamic agriculture consultants who consult in advanced composting techniques, was describing how he was using selected, you might say, effective microorganisms to nourish very advanced large composting, not just a pile, but a large composting container that would create a kind of field effect, a kind of aura. So the story, the sort of joke was that if the compost pile was large and happy enough, intelligent enough, the compost pile would run the farm. Now you say, how can a compost pile run a farm? Well, the picture that he conveyed is a famous story from Australia again, that the farms that had this very advanced, very happy microbial compost pile, and we believe the microbes in the compost pile create a plasma field which has a kind of a membrane, like a bubble of awareness that's sort of self-aware and kind of teachable and intelligent. And the famous story from Australia is that there was this situation where a plague, a large pestilence, was traveling over a whole bioregion, but the farms that had these giant compost piles that were so happy, the pestilence would skip those farms because the aura, literally the microbiome field effect bubble of intelligence, was such that there was a self-not-self membrane because the collective microbiome was so happy and so charged radiant. And, some of that bubble we think would be microwave and plasma, but basically it's a charged bubble that's self-aware. Well, lots of people have informed us that this is happening in our guts, and that's a plasma field as well. And, of course, that plasma field can be charged if in proper relaxed circumstances. Even things like Theraphi can help charge that part of your aura. And so then that collective plasma can become more intelligent, more negentropic, more self-aware, more steerable, more navigable, etc. So that's a practical example of a microbiome becoming intelligent and something you could communicate with. And I think it really is a cool sort of fun intro to what Kate is going to be talking about tonight, which is entitled Biohacking Health with Microbes and Theraphi Communication. So, without further ado, and thank you so much for coming, Kate is a friend of Claire in South Africa, who's pioneered so much of our Theraphi work in South Africa, and we're grateful to Claire for introducing Kate to us, and pleased to meet you, Kate. And please, Kate, it's all yours. Take over. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you very much, Dan, and I'm very excited to be here, and it's wonderful to see so many people who have turned up ready to hear, ready to receive. It is definitely, as you said, Dan, with reference to a hive intelligence with a particular personality. So you can see which hive is in dominion by the personality of the vehicle, the person, the animal, the life form. But I've come here after 30 years of naturopathic disciplines. I studied in London and I've practiced mainly colon hydrotherapy and fasting for 25 years solidly. The last 5 years I've done different things and expanded into different areas and realized really that for 25 years we've been practicing backwards, incorrectly, so to speak. And in the last 3 years, and I relate this to the awakening that's happening on the planet. And for various reasons, that awakening is being charged, that plasma field of awakening, that morphic resonance is being charged. So my journey last year brought me to the microbes that had been destroyed, the microbes that had been hacked. And I started to cultivate microbiome intelligence, and I started to use implants, enema bacterial implants. And it was like the same thing when you have an emotional intelligence awareness or awakening, or even a mental intelligence awareness and awakening. It's an awakening of consciousness that somehow flies through the heavens with you. It's effortless effort. And it's possibly what we've been doing wrong as Westerners. Not possibly, probably, very likely what we've been doing wrong. So my journey over the last 3 years, but definitely culminating in the last year, has been to take all of my naturopathic disciplines and integrate them in a cultivation of life rather than a study of symptoms and degeneration and death and how to be a healer. And it's completely changed. It all fell apart and completely changed. So without further ado, I'll go into my understanding and my awareness of gut gardening, the innate hive intelligence cultivation, and communicating with its field. And recently being introduced to the Theraphi for the last 6 months, working very strongly with the Theraphi and communicating much, much more strongly with that field through that magnetic charge. So that has brought a whole awareness and awakening to everything that I do. So if we look back a few million years, we find that bacteria evolved all life on this planet. They are the innate engine behind the cycles that govern our life-death-life cycles. So as I've said, my communication with the hive consciousness wasn't possible when I lived the normal mundane life of whether it was unconscious eating, sugar, stress, antibiotics as a child, or genetically mutated expressions of health, which was a very strong force towards my learning and seeking. And I found over the last little while is that if you restore the environments, you restore symbiotic life and you release this innate intelligence into the body, this innate life intelligence, seeking life. It's effortless. It's stood the test of time. And it, in essence, governs our consciousness. So the hive consciousness is either symbiotic or asymbiotic. It's either working with us or against us. And in 90% of the human race, we're probably sitting with a degenerative condition from very shortly after we're born due to the environmental insult that hacks its way into our consciousness. But if we understand the microbiome and we understand the need for that symbiosis as a life-governing movement, we understand that they outnumber our human cells at least 10 to 1. Our genes are outnumbered at least 150 to 1, and these are just the beginning stages of research. I mean, they are doing mammoth, wonderful things and finding the roots of disease rather than looking at symptoms and effects. But for me and my understanding, which is where I push the boat out a little bit, we are a genetic free trade system for microbes, completely under the governing host desire for homeostasis. which means that we have billions and billions of bacteria. They outnumber us a lot. They swap our genes, and they either activate or silence our genes. I'm going to tell you later about the fact that they play us like a harp. And the music that they play is dependent on who's in situ. So, for example, and I'm loath to demonize any bacteria, but for instance, Clostridium or any one of those variants, or the Candida albicans or any one of their variants, will dominate the system, and their waste is our poison. Whereas our lactobacillus and our bifidobacteria are happy, good little guys that release methylcobalamin and methylfolate, activating serotonin release in our system, our second brain. So our microbiome is truly an organ. And what we cultivate is our choice. It's always our choice. So we can be under possession. So the beautiful story about the permaculture or the biodynamic farms, I've had clients with cancer who can't actually understand a word I'm saying. So even if I suggest that they use a probiotic as a suppository to activate their septic tank, the bacteria that's dominating them and expressing this dis-ease and this disharmony in their life will not allow my resonance or the energy of my microbiome to enter their field. They will bounce me, and they will bounce any suppository or bounce any idea of an enema or cleaning out their colon, because they don't want their homeostasis. They don't want their space compromised. So something like H. pylori or any other parasitic invasion or bacterial infestation will start to build more ammonia in the system and start to place more pressure on the detoxification pathways and backing up. So then diet and epigenetic insult, environmental poisons, all aggravate the situation. But it all comes down to how our microbiome is coping with its production. So if we just look back into the history of fermenting bacteria, we fermented into life through the primordial soup soleil, the salt and water solution, before the atmosphere contained sufficient oxygen for aerobic life form. And what these little guys found, that when a bigger organism came along and ate them, they could actually survive nicely inside an anaerobic environment, which meant that they had a vehicle to take them out of the water and start to emerge from the water. And then life, or the harnessing of photosynthetic light from the sun, could adapt, as well as the energy converters. Symbiotically evolving carbon-based life forms as eco-vehicles to carry their populations into sustainable primary, secondary, and tertiary liquid sunlight converters, the field. So with every stage of the energy potential giving birth to every ever-evolving species, biomes, and microbiomes. And that's just your beautiful little symbiotic creation story that just makes so much sense and gives space for this field to develop in complexity, starting at this little minuscule organism into much more complex species. So we are intertwined in our evolution, and as we've, I suppose, let's just go with the definition, the human microbiome is all the genetic material from the microbes, bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and viruses that live on and inside the body. So every single one of us is unique. We're an original blueprint. There's no other microbiome like us, our individual microbiome. It's like our fingerprints. It craves, it's used to a different environment. We start with our mothers, and then we start to develop depending on our environment, our water, our air, our earth around us. And this is where the richest part of our microbes come from, our life-affirming microbes. The life-degenerating microbes that are designed to break down the protein of the dead body or the digesting matter tend to overgrow only when we overfeed them with too much yeast, sugars in the system that aren't breaking down. So that fermentation that happens in the gut starts to putrefy and cause megatoxins and a lot of pressure on detoxification pathways. The microbiome is considered an organ, so it is an organ. Until recently, it was not studied because you can't take it out of its anaerobic environment and keep it alive. So we didn't quite know what it did or how it controlled us, but we're getting there. And it benefits human health through the vitamin production, provisions of nutrients, educating and training our immune system. And that's just for a start. It's responsible for hundreds of thousands of functions in our body per second. And again, depending on what waste it's eliminating or cofactors it's eliminating. So the methylcobalamin, our methyl B12, when we're not getting that, there's 900 functions, methyl functions that are not working properly. And that's your RNA, your photocopying, your starter engines, your everything, your clarity of mind. It affects us. And that's the first genetic cog in the wheel. Not the first, but one of the most important first cogs in the wheel. So as we go, the microbiome will activate our immune system. Now, say for instance, we wiped out strep and E. coli and all the bacteria that we require in our system to make up a health biome. We've isolated them, but we've also used antibiotics that have been detrimental to other species. We haven't triggered our immune response properly, and we haven't activated those genes, so they remain silent or silenced, and we never cultivate the response, the right response to stress, immune stress, emotional stress, hormonal stress. So that's within the Western dynamic. We're not talking about a natural, original state. We're talking about a removed state. Then we got the use of sterilants, antibiotics, pharmaceuticals, GMO food, pesticides. We have had a seriously negative effect on the direction in which our bacteria have mutated. So as opposed to the life, death, life principles balancing each other, the one getting stronger and activating, say for instance, the death process, an infection, invasion, stimulates the immune function, which will then in turn stimulate the life-affirming bacteria, which will then stimulate your taste buds to either fast or cleanse naturally. Instead, we take pills, we wipe out bacteria, and we consistently eat the things that will make sure that the wrong bacteria will overgrow again. So it's a vicious circle, and in that is the gene expression. In that is where we mutate our genes and pass those mutations and those SNPs, those expressions, onto our children, the bondages of the forefathers. So for an example that most people will understand, the rise in autism is directly related to the rise in cesarean sections, and that's only one of the conditions that's directly related. It's aggravated with vaccines and other health protocols. So we have ensured a seriously challenged rising youth with health-threatening imbalances in gut bacteria. And this is in behavior, ADHD, it's in autism spectrum, and I would say in our schools in South Africa, wow, possibly 6, 7 kids in a class of 18 are problem children with learning challenges. And I will get into it a bit later on how I've been working with children and in 8 to 12 weeks having absolute miracles where these children are no longer problem children and have actually managed to catch up a year's worth of cognitive learning, reading, writing, all the basics. These were children that were expelled from school. So we'll go into that a little bit later.
That's such fabulous work there, Kate. I'm sure everyone will be looking forward to hearing what you do with those children to renourish their guts and how you've used the Theraphi. And we know that all the predictions are that autism is going to become the overwhelming symptom. The curves right now suggest like 50% of American children will probably be autistic within the next 10 to 20 years at the rate we're going. So we need you.
Well, it's just actually fermenting bacteria. We need to just hear the message and then start fermenting. It's free, it's for life, and it's easy. When you've been a mother and you've had children with problems and you've searched everywhere, it's so simple. The answer's so simple, and it's been staring us in the face all along. So the major problem that we have is the message that we give to our hive consciousness. We don't even know that it exists. We had no idea. We had adopted this Western allopathic approach of kill, maim, and destroy disease. I say this with absolute respect because there's always a time and place, and I'm an integrative practitioner. But doctors very seldom learns about health and wellness and what a healthy body looked like and how to restore that organism, but they would know a lot about the disease and how to remove its influence from the body, but that might have another cost to another system. So as bioelectric capacitors, and this is where Dan will be much more succinct in explaining, our DNA are antennae and capable of receiving and emitting the full spectrum of sound and light. The amount of sound and light that we take in is dependent on our reticular activating system or our capacity of the vagal response of our senses to coordinate the information into higher and higher levels of consciousness. Our sight and sound is currently polarized outside of our bodies. This is the general population, ensuring a self-enslaving addiction and dependency onto the matrix. We've blocked the full spectrum of the plasma field, or we're basically unable to see it or perceive it because our belief systems, our stories, our expectations, which command the plasma field, have been hacked and then indoctrinated. So depending on where we come from and how deeply we've been indoctrinated is that disconnect from being able to actually open up expectation and understand the field in a much deeper
I wonder, Kate, if an example of that might be when we measured the fact that in most children's classrooms, the frequencies in the fluorescent lighting were measurably destroying attention span. But if you use full spectrum sunlight, you measurably increase attention span. And later we learned the physics were that the harmonics of sunlight or broad spectrum or conjugate plasma, as it were, actually feed attention because they feed charge implosion and therefore plasma negentropy. So I would guess probably that the same physics would say that the wrong spectrum in the lighting would also be bad for your gut microbiome. So all of the things like electrosmog and the wrong lighting that are messing with our attention span are also messing with the plasma intelligence of our microbiome.
Absolutely. And again, those lactobacillus and bifidobacteria are emitting our serotonin, our feel-good hormones, and our B12, which is our ability to focus and our attention span, and especially those beautiful lights, those lights, they take us out of our natural cycles. So children aren't going to bed as the sun's setting and waking up with the rising sun, spending too much time behind television plasma screens and with false adrenaline rushes, and also being indoctrinated into a constant vagal fight or flight, vagal response, is all governing our hive intelligence and commanding it, what we are expecting and how we are living our lives. Whereas when we are having siestas and resting and children are playing in the dirt and going to sleep early and waking up early with the sun, that's a natural immune system. There's a natural balance and there's a natural evolution that occurs, a symbiotic evolution with the space around us. So that's kind of what we've lost in the Western civilized world. So I believe, as I said before, that the microbiome activates and silence our genes, like the playing of a harp, governing our state of consciousness, working to sustain life at its level, and its system. So if we're dealing with, let's just say, a candida overgrowth or an H. pylori, 50% of the world's population has got H. pylori, 20% of the world's population will be affected negatively by that H. pylori. Candida is in all microbiomes in varying amounts. When we feed that microbiome more and more sugar and yeast, it craves that sugar and yeasts, and that then governs our consciousness, our state of awareness, our ability to comprehend and work within, and I use this word loosely, within a multidimensional aspect. So being able to see the 3D world, the emotional content, the mental content, gain mastery over those spaces so that we can start to fractal out a more whole, consistent golden mean throughout our lives. So aligning the field is seriously important. And if we don't have a gut intelligence, we have got no grounding. We're at the whim of whatever bacteria is in control. And it is the nature of mind control that we don't know that we're under mind control and that we will die protecting it. So with that, I mean that the bacteria, the candida, when I suggest that someone give up their sugar or suggest that they bring down their caffeine intake, if it's a seriously dependent person and they're validated by their lifestyle and that bacteria, again, they will repulse me. They will find me offensive. And yet when somebody's done suffering and they're just sick and tired of being sick and tired, there's nothing that they won't do. And within 3 weeks of balancing a new microbiome, it's a sustainable new lifestyle hack. It's easy, but it really is about coming into alignment. So it's early to bed, early to rise, time in nature, the food that you eat. We'll get to that little bit later. And with that comes the lift in consciousness. I'm also aware, and you'll tell me what in your alignment with what you're understanding, but we have an influx of gamma wave radiation. Where it's coming from, there's different theories. However, this is causing all life to evolve, and life on Earth does evolve every 25,500 years. We've just gone through one of those galactic turns, so we're now in a new magnetic field. In more New Age language, we've come from the Piscean age to the Aquarian age, which is the age of water, where those microbes were water-based and emerging into the ether. So there's another magnetic field to work with, a new consciousness, a new understanding, which is being charged. And I really do believe that the Theraphi helps us to direct that charge and guide that charge, becoming conscious of it. So the good, the bad, and the ugly are evolving. That doesn't mean that just because it's a wave of radiation or a wave of energy charging our system, if our thoughts are crazy, we're charging those crazy stories. If our microbiome is out of control, we're charging that microbiome. So we're seeing this world wind up, and we're seeing these expressions of stress kind of almost collapse into a epidemic of cancers, and especially bone, hearts. There's been a lot of strokes, mental disorders, Alzheimer's, symptoms coming forward, especially when we find that we've got a huge CME or massive charge to our solar system, or sorry, to our ionosphere. We've lost contact with natural law and cycles, the fractal creation, and therefore our true power. So losing contact with this hive consciousness, the bringing in of antibiotics, and being so distorted and under their control, as in our tastes and senses are governed by this need, this adrenaline, a constant immediate gratification. It's just become out of control. And cultivating gut gardening, coming down to basics, to natural law, grounding, feet in nature, feet on the earth, are all the ionizing and almost defragging techniques, biohacking techniques that we are starting to employ to move forward. So, as I say, we've been hacked on every level, and it's time to hack our way back.
Kate, I think in terms of sort of conventional physics, that when more gamma ray hits, for example, we think it would be naturally detrimental. However, in electric engineering, we know that a weak gamma ray field can trigger electron cascades, for example, the Paul Brown nuclear battery. Now, so essentially, the message there was that much of that increased high-frequency gamma ray, et cetera, at least means accelerated metabolism, as you say, accelerating both the good and the bad. And as it were, if something is becoming unstable, it will get unstable faster, which is the need for grounding. So we know, for example, that the broad spectra of the Theraphi accelerates metabolism, and we also know that if you're not relaxed and grounded, it's going to be not so helpful. So the point is, adding spin density can be for better or for worse unless you, as you say, get grounded and give a phase lock to ground and thus enable that spin density to become stable. So I think that metaphor of physics where broad spectral phase conjugation can accelerate metabolism, but as they said, when they put the crown on the king and the capacitance was conjugate, his thoughts would speed up. And if the king had good intention, his field effect could become as big as the kingdom. But if he had bad intention, he would go nuts faster. So, in effect, as you say, developing grounding and pure intention, it determines whether the acceleration is helpful or not. Anyway, I think that metaphor you started is helpful. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Dan. Yes, it's one of my obsessions has been to go, right, the neuroscience of enlightenment, and why would yogis sit and what is exactly, and it's that focal point. Why the focal point? To guide the field, to be able to hold the field no matter what. That's the art of candle gazing. The first step in Hermetics is to develop that focused intention. And I'm only now beginning to understand that the microbiome of our heart consciousness is the engine that propels that movement. So there's wonderful teachers out there that will teach us about our thoughts and our focus and our emotions being the charge. No one tells us about our microbiome being that effortless effort, that engine that charges and moves things in a very powerful way. So to hack it back, coming back from last year was amazing. I'd lost everything. I had nothing. I had no health. I had H. pylori systemically. I'd been really badly hacked for one reason or another. We might go into that a little bit later. But I started to apply a very simple protocol of grounding. And I'd been looking for a magnetic pulse machine to help my family and I through a trauma. And a client of mine had said, Kate, we've imported this Theraphi into South Africa or into Neisner. Please, will you give it a go? And there's Claire's documentary and Dan Winter. And I was like, no, thank you very much. I don't use machines. And eventually I got to start working on the Theraphi, and the results were so incredibly powerful in relation to the fact that I was cultivating the microbiome. So the consciousness that I was receiving from the microbiome was charged with the work of the Theraphi. So what possibly would have taken me 10 years to emerge into took me 6 months. And in that space, I have worked on harnessing the theta space, which is the relaxation space, the space between thoughts, the brainwave space of resonant harmony within the Theraphi field. And that has been the single most powerful hack that I've ever come across in my 30 years of experience. So I started playing with it and playing with techniques. And this was blindly, as I say, because I was functioning much on my own until recently. And the Theraphi, I'd said to Mila, how often should I go? And she had said to me, she runs the Health Shop Organics that brought Theraphi into South Africa. And she said to me, go every day. So I thought, okay, let me whack it. And I was, by the end of the second session, I was opening up portals and making contact with my hive consciousness. They now work symbiotically with me. It's a much more controlled environment. I know when I've imbalanced it. They tell me what I need to do to correct it. And they've shown me very clearly how the bacteria create almost like a basket container that hold the base of the morphic resonance, holding that whole structure together for us to be able to play in consciousness. So it's just this beautiful symbiotic space created, and that'll bring us to the next one, the Eternal Now Moment Launchpad. So this now moment is all we have. And when I have aligned all my vehicles, like the stacking doll, the nesting doll techniques, I've aligned my emotional body, my mental body. So these were the hacks we knew before, using breath, using meditation, using all those spaces. Now working within the gut microbiome intelligence. So bringing that into alignment, resonant alignment, obviously using the brain, bringing that into a theta alignment. That then opens the heart. The heart is the secret sephirot, the path. That opens, and this is where Dan will step in and explain the implosion that happens, creating portals, intergalactic portals for me. That's the experience that I've had.
I mean, in terms of simple physics, a conjugate point is the place where the most number of waves can agree, very simply, which is another definition of the only possible still point among waves. And that introduces a physics concept of charge implosion, which brings us to the psychology of what it takes to inhabit a still point where all waves are agreeing. It means you need to be a shareable wave, and implies pure intention, and eventually applies a place where many intentions and tornadoes converge. So, yes, we know a lot about the physics of phase conjugate charge implosion behind Theraphi and centripetal forces in general. But exploring what that means psychologically is exactly why we need the help of people like Kate. Thank you, Kate.
So the talking about the phase conjugation and where everything meets, when you finally are able to take responsibility, aligning your vehicles for all your creation stories, collapsing all the stories. So the point I came to in my little midlife crisis last year was to understand that everything I had learned was wrong. Every single thing, most everything, was not correct. I had studied and studied and studied, and I was a true seeker. And I just got to this point of implosion, this point of phase conjugation. And the Theraphi, that Back to the Future point, if we bounce down a little bit, the Back to the Future part was the Theraphi was the lightning bolt. So when he's lining up that car, set his date time with his focus, and he's now got to get his speed going. And as that lightning connects to that point is when we get that implosion, that point of implosion. It's the same thing when we've collapsed all our stories and we've got no more expectations. We draw in a greater response from the plasma field. And again, if we're commanding quintillions of little bacteria, our inner garden, our inner bacteria, our inner life, there's no response that the plasma field won't give us. It really, if it's aligned with clear will, there's nothing we cannot create. It's like a giant oak tree. The giant oak tree, its only intention is to grow as big as it possibly can and produce acorns and drop those acorns and grow more oak trees. And it works symbiotically. That oak tree has all the water it needs, all the air it needs, the soil it needs, the nutrient it needs to go from that little acorn into that huge oak tree. It never wants for anything. And that's a true relationship with the plasma field. So what we've created as human beings and how our focus and attention is all over the place is so far from what we could be doing with the plasma field and how we could be communicating with our hive consciousness. So that then brings us to the bug power instead of suffering. I know that the Microbiome project's Bugs Not Drugs is their war cry. And on my website, purelife.org.za, I have a warning not to sterilize your children, not to antibiotic them, and not to go on a killing mission on bugs. They are our energy. They are our natural food. And with the right bacteria, if we look at any of the cultures that live for long, beautiful, long lives, we see that they are ones with lots of fermenting, lots of fiber, lots of relaxation, lots of soil and life force around them, huge bowel movements, and a lot of happiness. So that's free of disease and probably something closer to heaven on earth.
And just backing up a bit here, too, we're not saying that everyone needs a Theraphi. By no means. In ancient times, this ability to get to a charged still point was the sacred temple or the sacred space or the sacred stone circle, which are all doused to phase conjugate. So the availability of really good sacred space, and even classically you build your own sacred space in your home, But the Theraphi was a way to have that experience, particularly if you've gotten to a point of imbalance and didn't have a really good sacred space handy. But the point is that any place that creates really good charge implosion and a still point, which really defines sacred space, can help you get there. And Theraphi just happens to be one fun example that we've made available. But anyway, but what Kate is connecting that with, which is the intelligence of the microbiome of the gut, and how that plasma field needs access to that sort of still point in order to sort of get sorted and find its own neg entropy, is very helpful. So please continue, Kate.
Thank you, Dan. Yes. As I say, it wasn't available to us in South Africa, and we have had so much natural sunlight and beautiful seas to swim in, and we are very, very blessed to live in the Western Cape, just on a big farm in Harkerville. And so we have huge bioelectric energy available to us, and the use of this Theraphi while working in this level of awareness has been crucial for me, and so I'm bringing that together and bringing that for you, just to support the Theraphi, but by no means just cultivating your bacteria is miraculous. All of these things I'm talking about, one of them is miraculous. Apply them all, and it just is a formula for life. So in my understanding, in my very limited, weird way out understanding, my experience with the Theraphi is that it's charges, and I call a soul player is anyone who hasn't been hacked, anyone who's got life force in them, a twinkle in their eye, a sparkle, a purpose in their life, and is seeking a space of higher purpose, higher awareness, higher manifestation. So it gives that soul player, that soul, that charge, and that ability to start to bring itself back together, retrieve all its parts, reclaim its soul. When the focus and intention is used, so this is where I get a little bit concerned with the Theraphi, because if your focus and intention is not completely used and it's charging belief systems that might be hurting you or validating whatever disease, there is the potential that it, as we said earlier, could aggravate that. So I speak about the universe. I think we've been hacked with regards to the fact that we live in a multiverse, and this is my universe. We share a multiverse. When I'm able to hold my focus and intention, use the Theraphi to consciously collapse and then create my true individual universal story, we are able to imprint the multiverse way more effectively. So the magnetic imprint that I leave is much more powerful and less of a victim, as in it's less of the field imprinting me and more of me co-creating and causing the field. So it's turning up for me rather than me turning up to be of service and self-enslaved. I've lifted up from that law of 7 under the law of 1. So we are now powerfully co-creating under the law of 1 with these bacteria and colonies in our universe. Our colonies are our people, and we want our people to be happy. So again, through the Theraphi, you're able to balance the bacteria through intent, through focused awareness, and through building that resonance. You can hook into that resonance, and again, not 100% scientific terminology, but you can work at that resonance and empower that, or look upon, for instance, an Epstein-Barr virus, and once you look upon it, you put a glitch in that program, and you can collapse that story. So I find that 3 sessions in the Theraphi, holding an issue, I've wiped it from my magnetic field. I can't remember what the issue is by the 3rd round of breathing or the 3rd Theraphi session, depending on how big the trauma is. But the key is to be putting a new creation story. So making sure that there's an image that you're telling your body, that you're imprinting. And again, the microbiome and the subconscious work in pictures, not words. So you really want to get an image that you're working with to empower the field, let the field know where it's intended, where it's going, and what your intention is to going through this collapse. Because again, collapses can be like any detoxification. They can be very painful, or headaches, or any form of detoxification. And the individual's got to have that courage to walk through it. But once again, as you collapse all those charges externalized, awareness starts to become zero pointed. So once we are not charging, we're not accusing that person, not in that victim story, not charging on that drama that's happening over there, or I'm poor, or I'm rich, or I'm this, or I'm that. Once I am just 0 points, I can hold that 0 point eternal now, and that's a much more powerful space from which to open up portals, time travel, start to have expanded conscious experience. So the stacking doll technique is just something that a way of saying I'm stacking my emotional content, my gut, my emotional content, my heart, my mind, bringing them all together so that all my bodies are vibrating. That will then bring about cohesion within my field, and that will then symbiotically balance all aspects of chi, acupuncture, meridians, astral bodies. Everything is sealed. It's just effortless, and it can now happen I'm able to achieve it in a matter of seconds as opposed to days or weeks as I was before. And that's within myself, my children, and my clients, if they can understand the language that I'm speaking of. So we're hacking the space, the field, cultivating focus and energy harnessing, and then we obviously going to be aware of how we discern and share that energy.
And just to review also that we've always emphasized that ability to choose an intent and a focus was critical with Theraphi, because Theraphi is like launching a plasma tornado, and needing someone to steer is essential, as you say, choosing an intention.
Exactly.
And the other thing I like about what you mentioned there about theta space is, we're feeding the exact low frequencies of brain waves, which includes especially the theta cascade, which is below alpha. And I noticed in my own brain waves a dramatic increase in that low frequency, like 4 hertz theta, which they say is access to the deep sort of collective unconscious or, ancestral memory kind of thing. So the theta space is really ability to ride the long wave, which is really how you feel bigger things inside of you.
Absolutely. It's the gateway. That's the portal. That's the point of access to an interdimensional journey. And that is what yogis, monks, that's what they've been cultivating, that state, which is that holy space that you were talking about. So it's not through a Theraphi that you need to have this dependency on having a plasma charge. It's learning and cultivating the ability to make connection with the field.
And if I may say, this is not by way of an ad, but if you want to measure the ability to get to the deep frequencies in your brain waves, which are exactly the frequencies that power Theraphi, the brainwave harmonics, alpha, beta, theta of bliss, theflameinmind.com showed me how I increased dramatically my long wave theta. You can see it in the raw data around 4 hertz. And that's reaching into the underworld, access to the unconscious sort of thing. So the concept of theta healing is measurable, and it's fun with our brainwave toys. But please continue.
It is fun, yes. Biofeedback is fantastic. So if the field is made up of a full spectrum of sound and light, resonance, giving the plasma or ether platform with which to create with consciousness. So for me, my whole creation story has now changed from a 3D model of the world to a more simulated reality of a hologram where I can change vibrational states. And this has created a much more effective means to communicate with the field. It's much quicker. I'm not bound to the speed of light. Consciousness can travel faster and slower. And there's no suffering in this space because there's a point and a lesson to everything. So every experience, every thought, every judgment, every opinion can be polarized or depolarized very quickly. So again, learning that mastery and working within that space within the field, and then charging that is just being able to communicate that much more clearly. So we are source players in degrees of genetic expression, experiencing a plasma hologram. As I said, this is my new creation story, if it resonates. Source players with the capacity to connect directly to source. So whereas before we thought we needed a supplement or a food or a thing or a place or a person, it's now that ability to connect with a hive consciousness, cultivate that, and understand the symbiotic requirements to homeostasis. And it's not alkalize. It's not, the garden paths that we've been led down. It's a stillness. The food is very, very simple, very, very cheap. and preferably grown around you. It's that environment that we cultivate, that magnetic field that you speak of, that sacred space or state. And once that state is whole and resonant, cohesive, it's impenetrable, and nothing can touch it, not any form of attack, whether that's parasitic, bacterial, entity, anything with a lower frequency agenda can't hack that space any longer. But we do have free will, and we do need to make ourselves aware of how powerful we are, like they tell us to, but we don't understand how. So shamans have journeyed with the fractal field as communicating points, as always communication points with the field. Those shamans are the communication, they are the 0 point of the field, and that is where the heaven and earth connection can be made. The field responds to expectation, belief, and resonant frequency of the conscious observer. There's many experiments that bring us into that truth. The hive consciousness of the microbiome creates a baseline magnetic web of the hologram, allowing more coherence to grow from its direct requirements for all life, from all habitats, conditions, and energy sources. So if they are needing to stay alive in a certain environment, they will adapt, they will evolve, and they will learn how to digest certain vegetation, vegetables, fruits, or lack of. So if you go to any of the European cities, there's a much less vegetables and fruit. Those microbiomes know how to deal with that. They work within that field. Whereas when you're in a natural environment, take a natural person with natural microbiomes and put them in a city environment, they're not going to feel very well after a very short period of time. So we go into the giant tree. The field will always respond according to the frequency being emitted. So if I'm putting out a lack frequency, if I'm focusing and my intention is in that lack space of disease or lack of vibrancy, I'm going to cultivate that microbiome, and that microbiome is going to bring to me those conditions that manifest that experience. So that's just one way in which the microbiome can affect our experience. So if the opportunity is that consciousness is being charged and awakened, the other opportunity is co-creation with the field. It's cultivating the garden of life and adhering to the laws of life. So when we talk about laws and religions and belief structures, there's actually a very simple bottom line with which to measure the law. You're either in life or you're in death. You're in health or you're in sickness. You're in abundance or you're in poverty. And it's, yes, your conditions may have been not of your fault or whatever the cause might be, but there's always an opening to cultivate more life. There's always an opening to bring in more microbiome, more bacteria, and it's a daily cultivation, a harmonic daily cultivation. Stillness, meditation is a daily cultivation. So cultivating life-affirming microbiomes in accordance with life principles is activating the septic tank, compost, the most important nutrient production of the body. So that's the activation. So when the baby comes out that birth canal and is inoculated with its mother's bacteria, that's almost that active ingredients to the metabolic process to kick in, to start breathing, to start feeling, to start sensing. So cultivating mental and emotional silence using Theraphi technology to exponentially remove viral programming and restore true creation stories. Emotional reprogramming, neural repatterning, cellular reprogramming are all part of this opportunity. So genetic expression can be changed, genes can be activated and silenced. Spontaneous healing is a fact. It is a scientific fact. It has been monitored. The neuroscience of spontaneous healing has been researched and proven. So there's all these facts and figures that we can bring to the hive consciousness as a scientific proof or affirmation for the journey that we're choosing to go on. And when that kind of faith or determination or belief structure is brought to the party, it's the releasing of the golden mean, the effortless efforts, the emergence of the golden age, in full harmonic resonance with the part reflecting the whole and the whole reflecting the part. So we'll bring it to the TLCs, I think they're called, by various doctors, and I mean, there's the 7 laws of life. They change with whichever philosophy you're following. But in general, if we look around at the food that we eat, the water that we drink, the air that we breathe, the thoughts that we think, the friends that surround us, our time in nature, and the waste that we eliminate. These are tick boxes. These are 7 laws, simple laws that you can start tomorrow. And with each box that you tick, you're asking yourself, how am I feeding my microbiome? How much fiber? How much life force? How many cofactors? How much real food am I eating? The water that I drink, is it coming from a rainwater, a spring? Is it coming from what is the best quality filtration I can put into it? And then again, what intention am I putting? That water is memory. It's a plasma field, and it contains huge memory. So even if it's filtered water from a city outlet, putting a crystal in and saying a prayer over it will clear it. It's completely programmable. We can program our whole environment spontaneously in a very short space of time, just by being cognitive of all the intentions we're putting into our bodies. The air that we breathe, so if we're being hit by environmental insult every day, if we're breathing in pollution, we need to take precautions. We need to be aware of what we're doing and how we're doing and how we're compromising the bacteria, the laws of life, and how that's what efficiency or challenges to efficiency that is creating. So if we are short in oxygen, then oxygen is one of the biggest antiseptics, cleanses, balances. We need to make up or a supplement that is going to support. Once again, with bugs instead of drugs, once your body and your microbiome is balanced, you require less and less supplements, less and less chemical interaction or manipulation. The thoughts that you think are vital, that's the intention and the focused will. That's a cultivation. And oftentimes people will tell me that they meditate because they spend time in nature, or they're running, or they're doing breathing, or they've done yoga. But it is actively the silence, the space between the thoughts that we cultivate. We create more space, and that's then emerges into a slower brainwave function, our 4 cycles, our theta brainwave. And from there we can match into the gamma delta brainwaves. And that truly is the connection with the field, with the fractal field. The friends that surround you, or it's friends that the imprints on the field. The Greg Braden will say that anybody or any charge in your moment is telling you, is a reflection of you at any moment. So taking responsibility for that and owning that, and only having that clear, uplifting friendship, co-creative friendship. And once again, the bottom line is easy to judge. Either a person is bringing you up or they're taking you down. Either they are codepending with you and holding you in people, places, things, foods that are degenerating your condition, or they are bringing you out of that space. I can tell you that the life-affirming friends will be few and far between. The codepending friends will be the ones that will leave you feeling tired, hungover, will take you out for sugar, or validate you in a victim story. So those are the people that we want to minimize our time with, their family members, and just minimize and once again use it as an opportunity to transform into a more powerful reflective state. That in itself will change the nature and the frequency of that relationship. Time in nature, like with lightning, ionizing, grounding, an hour a day with your feet in the soil, there is nothing more powerful. So without a Theraphi, just nature, putting your feet in wet, dewy soil is the key to ionizing and eliminating the free radicals, again with intent and understanding, but just achieving that theta, that Schumann, that alignment with Earth is beyond powerful. An hour of theta meditation is the equivalent to conscious theta meditation is the equivalent to 8 hours of sleep. So for mothers that don't sleep, that are dealing with Asperger's children or whatever, children that aren't sleeping, that's a beautiful invitation and opportunity to find some really good theta binaural beats, and hack a theta brainwave space. And that gives you a good year or two to get under your belt with meditation. That's a fair amount of time that you can sit uninterrupted other than a crying baby, or if it's insomnia, you're even luckier because there's no interruption. So those are all wonderful opportunities to practice that theta brainwave entrainment. And again, all these new understandings or concepts that I might be introducing that might stress or pressure push you a little bit that is the invitation to a new creation story, moving from I need my 8 hours or 10 hours of sleep, I could never shut my monkey mind up, I don't have time for nature. You know, when you're drinking your coffee in the morning, spending 15 minutes out in nature with your feet on the grass would be the most powerful 15 minutes you can spend, rather than saying, I shouldn't be drinking the coffee and I've got to rush and I never take that time out. So ticking those boxes is the way that we respond to the field. We tell the field, yes, I'm worth it, and I'm interested in communicating with you. And that communication itself brings a huge response. And then probably most importantly from me as a colon hydrotherapist and enema expert and gut gardening voyeur, is the waste that you eliminate. So Bernard Jensen found that the African nation in not South Africa, but in the communities, Southern Africa, were the healthiest in the world and didn't know any disease until 30 years ago. And that was bringing in white sugar, white mealie meal, and stopping most of the fermented process, mkomboti, and the various different processes that they use fermentation. And their stools were about 500 grams, and they died of old age. There was no stress, there was a very natural life, but most importantly was the size of that stool. So it's the amount of fiber we take in, the prebiotics that we take in, and 60% of your stool is dead bacteria, which is also a very important part of the metabolic process. But the waste that you eliminate daily is imperative, and that's where enemas and gut gardening can come in. So that brings me to my results. After working with thousands of clients, one-on-one coaching, then branching into corporates, my far best work is to be working with children with challenges. My oldest son has Asperger's spectrum, and so it has been a challenge for me, and a very strong child. But what I have found is that he functions mainly in theta brainwave. He's single-minded when he's interested in something. He's very strong, and he'll chew up weak teachers, so anything that doesn't interest him. So his hive consciousness is very powerful due to the fact that he's been fed properly, but he was a cesarean baby. So we do have that dysbiosis and inability to concentrate and emotional content that comes in. So, and then my second child also has genetic mutations and is a very sensitive child. So Dan, my older son, and I have had a huge, huge journey. And the best times that we had was when I took him out of school and homeschooled him, and I could give him the right diet and work with him in a much more powerful way. But then I felt pressurized to send him off to school, and we would go through the habits of not eating properly, getting stressed at school, eating sugars. So I couldn't maintain his diet, and I couldn't keep him online. So with my second child, when he went through a major trauma last year, part of our collapse, and we had to leave school, it was the greatest gift that happened. And I was asked to look after 3 children that are extreme problem children, my child and my older son, Daniel. So I have this homeschool of 5 children. And in 8 weeks, and a tutor that I've brought in from Cape Town, who comes from quite a poor background as well. His diet was atrocious. All these children's diets were atrocious. 2 of these children are orphans from a nearby settlement, Kwanakotula. Both of them with huge potential, but both of them had been expelled from schools. So my behavior that I had in this house was for a few weeks quite an interesting space to be. I worked with each of them on the Theraphi, and all I did was, because I've got 3 minutes with a child, is I get them to hold their most frustrating feeling or their biggest anger or their biggest charge, and we just do fire breath, and then they've got to hold their breath until they can't anymore, and then they've got to go back to that feeling. And if they can do it 3 times, it's impressive, because usually by the time they've done it twice, they can't actually access that charge, that trapped charge anymore. With the 2 children from the orphanage that came from traumatized backgrounds, it's taken us 12 weeks to get down to the core-based trauma, and then we will start a new round of Theraphi to work within that. But with all of the children, so my children from Kwano, they were lying, cheating, stealing. It was the culture of gangsterism. They stopped that within a week. The lying, they now choose 12 weeks later, they now choose a proper diet. The mother of the house feeds them properly and is starting to feed all 12 children properly. The awareness, because of all the support, the doctors that were supporting these children now seeing the change in their behavior so miraculously after 8 weeks, is like a wave of awareness for people that are handling children, working with children, supporting children with these challenges. So that is unbelievable. My son, my youngest son, is functioning. He's 11 years old, and after a Theraphi session, he'll come home and learn the whole skeleton in Latin and spout it back to me. He's working with different dimensions, collapsing huge trauma, but he's also working, instead of being a grade 5, he's in grade 7. He's doing physics, biology, maths at a very high-end level and understanding huge basics, foundational maths principles that are way beyond his concepts and age potential. So he's working at a genius level. The other children are catching up. Every couple of weeks they jump another year, but just with foundation, writing, reading, coming through the trauma. And my most important discipline is diet. So they come here and they eat breakfast, lunch, and supper. Well, they go home with enough food and then to last them. So depending on what they will get. I've also got a child that again wasn't functioning. A very privileged child, comes from a privileged background, and he's almost more of a challenge because of getting his diet right, getting the sugar out of his diet, and getting him out of that resistant rebellion. But if I take him into Theraphi, take all his oppositional defiance disorder with me, he's the sweetest, most compliant child ever. So again, working with microbiome, the probiotics, oils, and diet as much as I can get down his throat, as he won't eat, the other children all eat. He doesn't eat. So we have a juggling act with these children. You work with the Theraphi with older people is actually more difficult than with children because of the belief systems and structures that they put in place. So I've worked with traumatized, molested children. In 3 sessions, I got a little girl from not speaking to dancing and singing and expressing herself just with 3-minute sessions, seeing her for 10 minutes. Really miraculous. Whereas an adult, it'll take them longer, and then we'll need to collapse the story, but they're attached to the story. And so that's way into heaven is definitely as a little child, and it's just incredible how quickly we can come back from huge trauma.
Kate, I'd love to comment on your beautiful insight in also adding that exercise you do with the children where you have them deep breathe, and whatever they're most angry about is compressed, as you say, collapsed. And the deep breathing and the focus and then holding it, enabling perfect charge collapse, is precisely how sorting is enabled, which is to say, anger is literally the 1/7 destructive interferent wave, but when that comes to charge collapse, implosion, conjugation, fractality, at center it is sorted. And so, whatever was not shareable is now becomes shareable and therefore, relaxes into fractality and distribution. So it's beautiful that you've intuitively added such a beautiful little exercise, the breathing and the holding. I love that. And actually here today with us was Carlos Avila from Barcelona, who documented using Theraphi in deep psychotherapy and showed evidently that it was very helpful in getting people deeper into their trauma feeling and bringing up the deepest moments more quickly. So again, perfecting that collapse enables the sorting. So it's beautiful how you've intuitively applied that, and that you're working with kids is just fabulous. So anyway, I'm awed and grateful. Please continue.
Well, I'm nearly done. It's as I was just saying, that the miracles with all truth seekers, I mean, that with adults is wonderful, but it's disastrous with those that are not ready to let go sometimes. It can be pretty scary emotionally for them, pretty scary when they're not prepared to do the collapse work. So I've got to be quite careful who I'm working with, and because it's a new technology for me, I'm finding the balance. The inflammatory response from the antithesis bacterial culture. So when we can charge the wrong bacteria, we can charge a bacteria that's got a degenerative condition or profile within our genetics process. This then responds, we respond with bringing in or implanting a balancing bacteria, and again, we find that balance and that 0 points. So instead of killing something, we add and build and focus and cultivate, and we find the balance in that way. So it's a much more gentle, symbiotic, Tai Chi kind of a way of addressing life rather than always needing to fix, kill, maim, and destroy. So it's gentle, and clients, students, children are all dropping into a space of stillness and allowing, which is probably more powerful than any other healing I've seen. And then just to bring it into the point where for myself, I have had lucid dreaming moments for the last 6 months where I'd never had lucid dreaming before. It was something that I'd always wanted to cultivate, and it just started happening spontaneously after I started working with the Theraphi. And within these lucid dreaming moments, I was opening up portals. So I had my first session with opening up a portal. I went down this long tunnel, opened up this portal. I was in a completely relaxed theta space, and I had learned that when I start perceiving things in the field in this unconscious space or subconscious space, not to look directly at it. So I was practiced enough to be able to manage not breaking it, not collapsing it with my conscious mind. And I opened these portals on these 5 beings that were watching screens, plasma screens, and I had obviously made contact too soon or at a time that was not appropriate. So the one being looked at me and sort of smiled and nodded, and they closed the portals down, but he first of all made the other 5 aware that I had actually managed to open up a portal, and they'd said, no, it's not time now. And then a couple of weeks later, I was allowed to open up portals, and I was shown how to open up these portals and how to communicate with these beings. And I was shown a geneticist. I was shown somebody working with genes. I was shown how our genes worked. And these downloads, is all I can call them, would happen in a matter of seconds. It would come across in an understandable format, but it wasn't done in English. It was done in pictures. The beings themselves were plasma beings. They had a slightly blue color to them, but they were human in form, although they were plasma beings, and they could shapeshift very, very quickly. So it was more about information from the field, and that amount of time that I was through that portal, I can't tell you what that was or how that did. As I explained earlier, I'm having genius in children developing magnificent. Benjamin's had magnificent visions of his guides and of beings that walk around him. One of them was, and I say the amaranth is, he came out of the Theraphi going, Mum, Mum. There was an and my guide was there, and he told me I had to eat amaranth. So since that time, we've been eating amaranth, and he's been cultivating his microbiome in a much more healthy way, eating in a much more healthy way. So for me, this experience is scientific. It's proven. I have no doubt in my mind. I am totally blown away by the simplicity of it. And it's free, and it's our inheritance. It's heaven on earth. So I believe we open up the floor for some questions now.
Kate, I think people are really impressed with the way you've turned the sort of plasma work and gut microbiome into a real, well-described teaching experience. Actually, I think people were listening pretty carefully when you said what it meant to feel a portal. You felt like you were going sort of through a plasma tube, and people may not relate when they see you're actually communicating explicitly with, extraterrestrial beings. But we have many friends who actually believe they've communicated with Andromedan culture and have mentioned the blue beings, Alex Collier and our friend Med. So we have other stories, but the basics here is that we've always taught that the ability to lucid dream depended on extreme coherence in the aura. We now know imploding charge from transverse to longitudinal compressional, and therefore fast sunlight and action at a distance, the Egyptian Ba from the Ka. And triggering that, high charge fields like Theraphi is a beautiful demonstration of there are ways to intentionally choose to learn lucid dreaming. And plasma charge like Theraphi is one way, and the discipline that you're teaching, which is so beautiful about the gut microbiome. And remember, we've always said that ability to lucid dream is a direct indicator of the skill to take memory through death. And again, that ability to get the attention coherently from the transverse to the longitudinal, the Ba from the Ka, which is what you take with you when you dream, as it were. So what your attention was doing as you went down that wormhole. But can you say again about you don't focus on the center of the tornado with your awareness as you're going into the kind of portal? It reminds me of the horse. Well, go ahead.
Yes? No, you go ahead. It reminds you.
Well, it reminds me of when they talk about the horse whisperer, that yes, you relax and you can only send pictures in your telepathy to horses, and then at a critical point you need to know how to release that picture by stomping your foot and breathing out, and then the horse will see the picture you just sent. But also, you would never look that horse in the eye. It would take it as very aggressive, actually.
Absolutely. Your will somehow gets involved. The minute you focus, it's almost as if your left brain will kick into some kind of a judgment on it. And it's imperative that you remain free of judgment or contact, attachment, I think would be the right word, to what you're perceiving. So the minute I go, what is that? Or is that face? Or, what being is that? Or, is there a name? Can I name it? The minute I start to control it, I personally tend to lose the impression that I'm receiving. And it gets easier and easier to cultivate. So after you've been through this process a couple of times, you get to know that, and then you'll look upon it and it'll disperse, and then, oh no, man. And then you've got to wait another couple of days until you manage to achieve that coherence.
Yes, and we've had many questions about what, for example, Medrick in Perpignan reported, that Theraphi plasma can be very helpful in releasing trapped ghosts and plasma entities, and the path you take after death, etc. So we know that from Karatkov's measure that where your plasma bubble goes after death, the ghost as it were, it looks for the place of charge implosion, the quote-unquote sacred space, or the place of power, as Castaneda would have called it. Because what that plasma being requires is conjugate charge implosion to achieve acceleration into, we now know, longitudinal charge distribution, which is DNA radio and how the collective unconscious and how you get to be ancestral memory. So this physics of the hygiene of how you're going to deal with plasma intelligence extends to understanding where you go after death and how you deal with ghosts and plasma entities. And so there's a whole school of astral hygiene that's introduced once we understand the real science behind plasma.
It's going to be fascinating. It's very exciting. The idea of our future for health, wellness, happiness, schooling, education, it transforms effortlessly and obviously and completely. It's a revolution. It really is.
And you're starting in the right place, teaching people practically what to do, both nutrition-wise, and that gut microbiome is making a field effect that's intelligent, and you need to like it and treat it like your favorite pet puppy dog.
It is. It's your favorite puppy dog. It's a whole community there. There's like colonies of, and the reflections of any community that's not symbiotic with their natural environment. So if we look at cultures that are out of balance, or we look at cultures that are in balance, you can see reflective states of bacteria, characteristics and resonances, and it becomes quite fun then when you meet people and respond with people, and you can see what consciousness, hive consciousness is, they're under possession. And you talk about entities, moving entities. I come from a lineage of healers, and it's part of why I am where I am at is because of my health. And I would get these migraines every time I picked up an entity, and there was no one to teach me, and so I had to learn this myself. I had very good teachers at the beginning, but a lot of it was self-initiated, self-taught, and so I would suffer with these 3-day migraines and 2-day migraines, vomiting, and very, very sick until I would have particular people that were strong enough to either pray with me or work with me consciously or unconsciously on a level that could help clear me. And now with the Theraphi, I'm able to actually consciously go in, do the work, the entity work or the removal, and then come and clear it. And it's so much more productive and so much more powerful. And again, with a strong hive consciousness, there aren't any contracts with those lower frequencies, those lower resonance. So you aren't as trapped. You're not as underneath those spells or those control levels, those mind control levels. It isn't individuation, but it is a releasing of that lower energy. Is always seeking rest, and if it's trapped, it's up to no good. It's up to nonsense. So when you release it, that conversion of energy, I find that that's almost the repayment is the level of consciousness is exponential. So whenever I've moved on a fairly dark entity or heavy entity or bloodline problem, or the repayment is in consciousness, and it's exponential, and it's in the field. It's plasma.
It reminds me of what we learned about Kundalini, that Kundalini is basically a huge plasma field that basically eventually goes to the top of your head and burns like a flame, and it can feel like a huge headache, actually, until that plasma flame implodes and goes to a tiny still point wherein it is sorted and becomes transcendent, as it were. So again, enabling implosion creates the centripetal force, which ultimately then is negentropic and self-organizing, which you say has correctly perfected collapse. Back to just if you want to speak a little bit more before we leave, when you were speaking about the different imbalances in the gut bacteria, you mentioned like pyloric and staph and strep and that sort of thing. Would you even like to give an example when someone has, say, a staph or a strep infection or something where one of these bacteria is out of control, and the doctor says, well, here, you need a broad-spectrum antibiotic. What do you do instead, or What do you tell that doctor in practical terms?
Well, it is a lifestyle. It's a journey, first and foremost. So in an acute situation, there is always the need for medicine, and first and foremost, like stay alive and stay healthy, and we can deal with the building of the microbiome afterwards. Obviously, we want to minimize environmental insult. So if somebody's taking antibiotics to deal with these things, it's important to remain powerful and positive in that choice. Always, no matter what line of healing we choose, we must have faith and believe in that choice. However, when you start balancing it, the Rife, there's nothing more powerful than the Rife machine. So Royal Rife, I'm sure you know well, resonance medicine, but that is the most powerful way of removing a particular resonance of bacteria, and being aware that there's not only ever one bacteria, there's going to be 5 or 6 variations of a bacteria in that infection. So you want to remove the infection. So whether that's a natural antibiotic using some wonderful natural remedy, garlic or whatever, whichever one, colloidal silver or hydrogen peroxide, depending on what we're dealing with. And then the Rife machine brings that down, but while cultivating the good bacteria. So whether you take antibiotics, use the Rife machine, use a natural antibiotic, that's still all killing, and we want to cultivate. We want a life program. So it's within the coffee enemas, and I will have all these details up on my website, purelife.org.za, as well as I am available to chat if anyone needs support before setting up an enema protocol. But to do an implant of a 14-strain probiotic, liquid probiotic, or a very good natural cultured yogurt, you feel the anti-inflammatory effect immediately. Specific strains of bacteria actually will go in and clean up, but those all need to still be identified. So at the moment, I'm just working with a broad spectrum natural probiotic liquid that you put so much into your little enema bucket and do it as a rectal implant. And 3 or 4 of those implants creates a whole new microbiome. You don't have to do fecal transplanting.
Could you say again about what that probiotic liquid is for our friends?
EM, efficient microbes, a probiotic culture, liquid culture. So my most favorite one to cultivate myself is mead, honey, a honey base, and using a little bit of ginger to activate the bacteria. You get a beautiful natural yogurts with Lactobacillus bifidobacteria, but your key is that you want as many variations of bacteria naturally cultured as possible. So probiotics that are cultured in a lab are not naturally cultured. They're not sustainable, as in they won't reproduce. So they will only be effective in the system for 20 minutes. Taking a probiotic orally, it shouldn't make it through the hydrochloric acid of the stomach. So if it's making it through the hydrochloric acid of the stomach, there's a problem. So your stomach should be between 0 to 3, usually around about 1.5. So a minimal amount of probiotic makes it through the gut. And if you've got probiotics making it through the gut, then it means you've got bad bacteria making, or you've got the more negative bacteria that are more poisonous making it through, or life-threatening making it through. So your apple cider vinegar in the morning to ensure that your stomach is the right pH, and then doing an implant or a cultivation of a bacteria in the gut, in the septic tank, is obviously the way to start populating your bacteria again. Did I lose the question?
And there's pretty detailed instructions about that on your website, right? purelife.org.
There's detailed instructions. My number is there. My email address is there. People are. I had to share the message, and it's really just to get people understanding and comfortable with a life-enhancing probiotic cultivation rather than a life-destroying one. It's scary. It's really scary at first because we've been indoctrinated to sterilize and kill and maim and destroy, and it's not. It's a cultivation.
It's beautiful. It's kind of a shamanic relationship with the plasma field of your guts, as it were, and you being the shaman.
It is. I have a gift with the gut.
Well, we can't thank you enough, Kate. Billy Weisberg is saying, thank you for sharing. Your experience is very helpful and practical. Michael O is thanking you here. So we're all
Yes, thank
thankful
you
for your
very much.
information.
Yay.
And,
Oh, such a
and
pleasure.
you,
Thank you very much for listening and being such a fantastic, receptive audience. It's really exciting to launch a new message in a very difficult, challenging world. Thank you
and
very
you are a
much.
pioneer for us. Your bravery there in the difficult environment with difficult children in Africa and the way you've brought that forward. You know, Claire originally talked about her work with autistic kids in her school using Theraphi and talked about de-stressing and specifically reducing anxiety. And we have that film from Claire. We'll link with this. But you've really taken this to the next step. And so we really
I'm
appreciate
glad I could
also
be
if you would
helpful.
write more about your
I
experience,
will.
both with the microbiome and with children and Theraphi, and so the feedback will increase. Thank you so much, Claire. Blessings.
Thank you so much. And thank you for this wonderful opportunity and all the wonderful work you do.
Yes, okay. So we will share this video
Thank you,
widely.
everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you for these
everybody.
wonderful messages. I really appreciate it.
Yes, this will be at Fractal U. This will put this on Kate's website, and we'll put this on our Theraphi website. So you'll be seeing the films. Thanks for joining us, everybody. That
Thank
website
you.
again, Billy, was purelife.org.za. You see it at the top of the screen here, too. Blessings, everybody. Thank you, Kate. See you. Stay in
Thank you
touch.
very much.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye, everybody.